Jim has been an investigative reporter and an author, speaker, guest on many television shows and radio shows over the years. Jim is particularly qualified for this exact topic because he's actually taught a course on the Kennedy assassination at the University of Texas at Arlington for 30 years. So let's just get right down to it. Jim, happy birthday a little bit early.
Well, thank you, Laurel. Happy birthday to you, too. I guess it comes around here. You know, in fact, come think of it, it happened to me last year.
Yeah. I kind of have a memory of that, too, but you said something about the memory going as you get older, and I think you're probably right about that.
Well, they say the two sure signs of advancing senility are the loss of memory and I can't remember the other one.
I knew that was coming. Oh, Scorpios have to stick together here. Well, Jim, we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of the assassination, and your book, for those who aren't aware of this, served as the basis back in the early 90s for the movie Crossfire that Oliver Stone put together and released, and you actually were the technical consultant, weren't you, on the information in that?
His movie was called JFK.
Right.
My book is Crossfire.
Right, and the new release is also called Crossfire Revised and Updated.
Same thing, yep.
Right. And I noticed that it's available on Kindle.
Yeah, it is, and it's got new photographs in it, including a blow-up of the Zapruder Frame 314, where you can plainly see that the driver did not turn and shoot Kennedy. So let's dispatch with that particular theory.
Wow, the Zapruder film is chilling, to say the least. Some of the frames of it are, I'll tell you.
That's true. But what you will learn in the new updated, expanded version of Crossfire is that it is now, I think back in the 80s when I first published Crossfire, I alluded to the fact that some of the researchers were questioning the legitimacy of the Zapruder film, and there were those who said that it had been tampered with.
Oh, my.
But of course there was a huge argument against that, saying that they didn't have the technology at that time. Well, what you'll find in the new version of Crossfire is, yes, they did have the technology. Yes, it was at the National Photographic Interpretation Center of the CIA the day after the assassination, before it was ever turned over to Time Life, and that, yes, it's been tampered with. And in fact, I have 11 Hollywood film and video experts who have all looked at it and said, well, this is a crude forgery. And they have found places on the Zapruder film that we know there was 6 missing frames, which throws the time frame completely off. And what we now know, thanks to Japanese network television, because they managed to get a copy of the Zapruder film that was intact, did not have the missing frames. And what we find is that the reason these frames are missing is because there's very clear evidence that a shot hit the highway sign, the Stemmons Freeway sign there in Dealey Plaza. Well, there's another extraneous bullet, and of course, trying to say that one person with a bolt-action rifle can fire 3 times in less than 6 seconds is pushing reality. But when you get 4 shots and now 5 shots, it's just it becomes impossible.
Yeah, I want to take a second to tell everybody I've been really impressed with how many different documentaries and research shows and not just movies and fiction, but real research have been on the television. Most of it's on National Geographic and Military Channel and Nova, and there's more coming up in the next 2 weeks. So I'd encourage anybody who's interested in this to Google JFK assassination November 2013 and see what's coming up. But there was one on that I had been watching over the weekend called The Missing Bullet, and I think it was on National Geographic. And they were talking about that very thing, that there were 3 casings that were found on the floor by the window in the school depository, and yet many, many witnesses said that they clearly heard 4 shots, So what happened to the fourth bullet? And they were looking at not the metal highway sign as you were talking about, but they were looking at the support that held up the traffic signal right there where Houston turns onto Elm Street, because it
Mm-hmm.
was right in the path of the line of sight from that window. But
Mm-hmm.
that's probably the bullet. Apparently, there was a bullet that somehow ricocheted and knocked concrete loose off of a curb and clipped some guy in the face that was over near the overpass.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And here, let me add to that by telling you that actually they only found 2 shell casings on the 6th floor of the Scuba Depository.
Ah.
Okay. In fact, in the new updated version of Crossfire, I published the Warren Commission's version of the Dallas Police evidence sheet, and it shows 6.5 millimeter spent rounds, 3. Okay. Well, they were arguing that Oswald fired 3 shots, and so therefore they found 3 shell cases, right? Except in the early 90s, when they opened up the police files in Dallas, I rushed over there and poured through their files, and I found the original Dallas Police evidence sheet, and it shows they only had found 2 shell casings. Okay, and now to show how funny that is, the National Archives has published a photograph of the 3 shell casings that were empty shell casings, and the one live round that they said was found still in the rifle. And the live round and 2 of these shell casings show a very distinctive dent on the shoulder of the brass shell casing, but the 3rd shell casing does not show this dent, which they said was a peculiarity of Oswald's rifle. When you loaded a shell into the chamber, it would dent the casing. So that means the 3rd casing that suddenly turned up, and their explanation is that a Dallas police officer carried it around his pocket for a few days and somehow kind of forgot about it, that it was important evidence. And so it just suddenly turned up after a few days. And this one does not have the dent, which indicates it was never loaded in the Oswald rifle.
Well, the whole topic of... Go ahead.
Yeah, it's just the beginning. Let me see if I can cut to the chase here. Yes, we're going to be inundated with books and articles and retrospectives and TV specials and everything else. And basically all it's going to do probably to the average person is just keep them confused. Because you got one expert saying one thing, you got another expert saying another, you got one claim, a counterclaim, one conspiracy theory followed by another conspiracy theory. So let me just cut through the whole thing. And here's the whole thing, folks. If you trust the government, the federal government of the United States, then you must trust the evidence that they present. And that evidence, on the face of it, seems pretty incriminating towards Lee Harvey Oswald, and they build what seems like a pretty solid case that he did it with 3 shots from the 6th floor of the School Book Depository, and case closed. Okay, but if you doubt the government, or if even would consider that maybe they are presenting bad evidence, then you look closer and you begin to actually study the evidence with a fine-tooth comb, and you'll find it starts falling apart. Okay? Here's a classic example. On Monday night, following the Friday assassination, the district attorney of Dallas held a news conference, and almost as an afterthought, he said, "Oh, have I mentioned, we've got his fingerprints on the rifle." Well, that pretty well, seemed to tie the whole thing up for most people, because, hey, they caught the guy, and they said he found his fingerprints on the rifle. There, took care of that. Except until you really begin to look at that issue, and what you find is that on Friday night of the assassination, totally against the law, totally against procedures, and based on pressure from high powers in Washington, D.C., all of the evidence, including the rifle, were taken away from the Dallas police, who were trying to investigate it, and shipped up to the FBI in Washington. The next day, in a document signed by none other than Director J. Edgar Hoover himself, they said no usable fingerprints were found on the rifle. or even the inner parts of the rifle. On Sunday morning, Oswald is killed by Jack Ruby in Dallas, and that evening the rifle is sent back to Dallas. And on Monday morning, 2 FBI agents, Harrison and Vincent Drain, carried the rifle over to Miller Funeral Home, and even the media reported that the FBI with a crime scene kit spent a long time in the morgue. Well, the funeral home director, Paul Grody, years ago told me, and has said publicly recently, that he was there when the FBI agents put Oswald's dead hand on the rifle. And they said and Paul Grody said he had a hard time getting the fingerprint ink off of Oswald's dead hand in time for the burial that afternoon.
Oh my.
So you see, you look closer and the so-called hard evidence starts falling apart.
Well, you can't ask for a story that has has more loopholes and twists and turns in it than this one does.
That's true. That's true. And they start by telling one big lie, which is Kennedy was shot through the neck. Okay? Kennedy was never shot through the neck. There was a puncture wound on the front of his neck at about the Adam's apple that all the medical people in Dallas said it was a puncture wound. It was an entrance wound. So he shot from the front. And but there was no exit wound in the back of the neck. Okay, and they were working to save his life, so they never really turned him over. So, but at the autopsy, when they examined the body, they found a puncture wound in the back, below the shoulder blades, about an inch or two to the right of the spinal column. All right. Well, now that number one, they tried to probe that wound, and it wouldn't probe. They even tried to use a metal probe, and it wouldn't probe. So something had struck him in the back, but either somebody had taken it out or it's worked its way out because there wasn't anything in there.
Okay, now wait a minute. When you say it wouldn't probe, what you're saying is, and what I read is that
there wasn't
one
a
of the
path
doctors,
through the body.
Right. One of the doctors actually stuck his little finger in that hole with a glove on, and it didn't go anywhere. It just
didn't go anywhere. That's right. It didn't connect. Okay, now, they are trying to say, though, that the back wound connects to the throat wound. Well, if it did, that's an upward trajectory, okay? And Oswald was 60 feet in the air, supposedly, on the 6th floor. So it just didn't even work. So, what are they going to do about that? And, well, that was taken care of by Gerald R. Ford, our only unelected president. Never ran for president. Nobody elected him to be president. He was appointed president by Richard Nixon, who had appointed him to be vice president when Spiro Agnew got in trouble and had to resign. And, of course, then Nixon resigned, and Gerald Ford pardoned him of all his crimes, past, present, and future, and obviously was put there to do that very thing. Well, Gerald Ford had sat on the Warren Commission. And Gerald Ford, it turns out, thanks to the Assassination Records Review Board, they came up with the memo that Gerald Ford had sent to the authors of the Warren Commission, ordering them to change the wording from Kennedy was shot in the back, which is the truth, to Kennedy was shot in the neck, which allowed them then to argue that this one bullet went through his neck, did not strike any bone, and continued downward to strike Connolly, shattered his 5th rib, exited out his right chest, entered his right wrist, and shattered the wrist bone, one of the densest bones in the human body, and then ended up over in his left thigh, and then somehow worked its way out and was found on a stretcher in Parkland Hospital that could not be definitively linked to either Kennedy or Connolly, and they said, that's the bullet that did it, the single bullet.
That's the magic bullet.
And that became the single bullet theory, and of course Arlen Specter did that.
Now, what's interesting also about that, Jim, all of that damage that if that was a magic bullet, and if that actually happened, which I don't believe for a second, it would have left metal debris in at least Connolly's body because it kept breaking bones as it was swarming around in there. But the bullet that they found laying on the gurney was almost pristine, wasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, that's how they described it. The authorities described it as pristine. It was not deformed. It was not flattened. In fact, the photograph that I have, that I published in the new version of Crossfire, has only a small little nick out of the very nose of this bullet, and that was where the FBI chipped off a little piece for spectrographic analysis. In fact, if you want the proof of the errancy of the single bullet theory, in my new updated Crossfire, I publish Connolly's wrist X-ray. Okay, and you can see where his the main bone was broken and then set back into place. You can also see bright pieces of metal still in his wrist at the time of his death and when they buried him. So in other words, there's more pieces of metal that was still in Governor Connolly's wrist when they buried him than is missing from the bullet that they still claim caused the wound.
Right, right. But then that's not any stranger than having a World War II almost antique rifle leave Dallas and go to D.C. with no fingerprints or anything on it, and then return over the weekend, and then all of a sudden it's got prints on it.
That's true. Tell me if you can hear this.
Yep.
Did you hear that?
Yep.
Okay. I'm holding a absolute duplicate of Oswald's 6.5 millimeter Mannlicher Carcano rifle.
Okay.
All right, it's a bolt-action rifle. It's a World War II gun. It's a shoddy piece of work, actually. In fact, the lot that included the one they said belonged to Oswald was actually in a court battle at the time of the assassination because the buyer said that they were defective. So, but here's the point. Everybody, and you've heard this too, everybody who was a witness in Dealey Plaza described, well, some said 3 shots, some said 4, some said 6, but generally they have agreed on 3 shots, okay? And
okay.
what they've all told me, and this is including Senator Ralph Yarborough, who was riding with Lyndon Johnson, and former House Speaker Jim Wright, who was in a car 2 back behind them, they heard 1 shot, a pause, and then 2 shots just right on top of each other.
Boom, boom.
In other
right.
words, kind of a bang, bang, bang. Okay? Now, here's this Mannlicher Carcano, and I'm going to rack the bolt and pull the trigger as fast as I can. There. Did you get that?
I
Bang,
did. Now,
click,
how many
click,
seconds?
Click, bang, click, 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 bang. You cannot get a bang, bang with a bolt-action rifle.
Not with the same rifle, you can't.
Not with the same rifle.
So there had to
In
be
fact,
2 rifles at least.
Exactly.
Well, now
Exactly. And
didn't-
where was the other rifle? On the grassy knoll.
Didn't I
And
also
they even
hear,
reported, they even reported seeing a puff of smoke drifting down from the grassy knoll. And all through these years, this is so wild because I just got through doing this for the Travel Channel. They did something that should have been done 50 years ago. They actually, because all this time, all these years, the authorities have argued that they couldn't have seen a puff of smoke drifting off the grassy knoll because modern guns don't smoke. And, well, yes, they do, okay? And especially if they've been recently oiled. So what the Travel Channel did, and it's on one of their programs that is airing right now, is they had a former CIA sniper, and he and I went up into the railroad tower that Lee Bowers was in, that's behind in the parking area behind the picket fence on the grassy knoll, and to see, and they had a shooter with a rifle, and he was standing behind the fence, and he fired several times. And the point of the exercise was to see if we could see a puff of smoke. And we did, each and every time he fired. So Lee Bowers was telling the truth when he said he saw something catch his attention behind that fence, either a flash or a puff of smoke. And then you've got Nellie Connolly, who said she saw smoke. You've got other people who said smoke was coming down from the grassy knoll. And in fact, in the new version of Crossfire, I published a frame from an NBC cameraman that shows the puff of smoke drifting off the grassy knoll. So there's where the other gunman was. But this is how crazy this whole thing is, Laurel, is that since we now have a photograph of a man firing a rifle from behind the fence on the grassy knoll, and since the majority of witnesses in that end of the plaza said a shot came from behind the fence on the grassy knoll, and since the House Select Committee on Assassinations had 2 separate sets of acoustical scientists who said, based on their studies, that there was a shot from a gunman behind the fence on the grassy knoll, you know, if I tried to tell you there was nobody there, you'd think I was an idiot. But this is a Kennedy assassination, and when I try to say there was a gunman on the grassy knoll, I'm still the idiot.
Well, it's just you can't make this kind of stuff up, Jim. It's an amazing story, and um, I grew up in Dallas and was sitting in junior high school when he was assassinated. So you would think someone who was there and must have heard an awful lot about things in general all these years, I would know more about it. But I highly recommend the book Crossfire. Please check out Amazon.com. I've put the link up to it in the chat room here at I'm sorry, at InceptionRadioNetwork.com. We're talking to Jim Marrs, the author of Crossfire, The Plot That Killed Kennedy, revised and updated, brand new out on October 22nd, just a couple of weeks ago.
Yep.
Now, this story just keeps on giving, Jim. Let's talk about. You mentioned the Warren Commission and also the House Special Committee. Now,
Select committee, yeah.
there were some people involved back then. Let me just give you a list, and you jump in and start with whoever you want to. There were people, for example, Allen Dulles and his brother John Foster Dulles. John Foster was Secretary of State. Allen was director of the CIA. And Kennedy decided that he wanted to completely dissolve the CIA because they double-crossed him over Cuba. Then there was J. Edgar Hoover, who didn't like Kennedy anyway. There was Sam Giancana, who was running the East Coast Mafia. LBJ had found out he was going to be dropped from the ticket the next year in the election.
Yep.
And then Nixon had a little run-in because the idea of the Bay of Pigs operation was really his, and Kennedy took it away from him.
Yep.
Was there anybody in that group that could have had anything to do with making this happen and then helping cover it up?
How about all of them? See, for years now, I've been asked the question, will we ever know the truth about the Kennedy assassination? And I maintain that they're not asking the right question because the answer to that question is we already know the truth. All right, we know the truth now. And what is that truth? Well, that truth is that why should the combined forces of the CIA, FBI, the NSA, the DIA, the police forces, the military, FBI, and for 50 years, and they can't figure out who really killed the president of the United States? That makes no sense whatsoever. Why is it so confused? Why is it so mixed up? Okay, so you have to consider that it's only that way because people in high positions created it that way. Okay, anybody could have killed Kennedy. KGB agents, Castro hitmen, CIA agents, mafia assassins, yes, even the lone nut could have killed Kennedy, but who had the power to cover it up? Who had the power to confuse and confound federal investigations? All right? Who had the power to suppress evidence, fabricate evidence, and intimidate witnesses? And this is all documented. That's not just theory. I could document each of those things. And in fact, when you get right down to it, that I can name you the two men who, in a court of law, would be found guilty in the Kennedy assassination. And that is his successor, Lyndon Baines Johnson, and his next-door neighbor and old buddy, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. Now, can I prove that those two men ordered or even orchestrated the Kennedy assassination? No, I cannot. But what I can prove, beyond any reasonable shadow of a doubt, that those two men took actions that blocked and thwarted any kind of meaningful investigation as to the truth of what happened in Dealey Plaza. This, under our legal system, makes them accessories after the fact. And under the law, an accessory is considered just as guilty as the person who pulls the trigger. In fact, we have executed people in Texas who the facts of the case show did not kill anybody, but they were there, or they hid the gun, or they drove the car, and they were an accessory after the fact, and they're considered just as guilty as the person who pulled the trigger. So we need to quit being distracted by how many gunmen and how many shots were fired and who paid all the money, and we need to just simply stop and say who are the accessories after the fact, and you're going to find that it's Lyndon Johnson, J. Edgar Hoover primarily, and then following along behind them comes Arlen Specter and Gerald Ford and others who consciously or subconsciously went along with the cover-up. And some of the people who participated in the cover-up did not do it for sinister reasons. For example, Chief Justice Earl Warren turned down the chairmanship of the Warren Commission 3 times until finally Lyndon Johnson called him in for a face-to-face meeting and told him, said, look, you were a military officer in World War I, and you've got to do your duty now and chair this committee, and you got to find that Oswald was guilty and did it all by himself. Otherwise, it might lead to World War III, and you'd have the lives of 20 million Americans on your conscience. And according to the reports, Earl Warren left this meeting with tears in his eyes and very grudgingly chaired the Warren Commission, which was about the saddest example of an investigation that you can conceive of.
Well, yes, definitely. Why are some of the documents, the files on this, not even going to be unlocked until 2039, Jim?
Well, because what I'm telling you is that on November the 22nd, 1963, the United States of America suffered a coup d'etat, okay? They took over, and a coup d'etat, his dictionary definition, is a change of government through a violent act, and that's exactly what happened in Dallas in 1963. In fact, they were well aware of this. John J. McCloy, who had been a mentor to Allen Dulles, a big member of the Council on Foreign Relations, former CEO of City National Bank, which is now Citicorp, was one of the largest lenders of money to Hitler and the Nazis, sat on the Warren Commission. And during one of their sessions, he says it is of the most paramount importance that we show the world that the United States is not just another banana republic where the government can be changed, through a conspiracy. But I'm here to tell you the sad truth is that we are just another banana republic. And that's what happened in 1963. That is the truth.
Well, and I think I also read that they kind of model that whole protocol of the patsy and multiple snipers and a triangulated shot. They modeled that in a Guatemalan assassination, didn't they?
Oh yeah. Well, it fits, a triangulation of fire in a ambush, with snipers, and then a scapegoat to throw the whole thing off. False flag, where you try to lay the blame off on Castro or on the Russians or on somebody else. I mean, that's just standard operating procedure. It's just the way it works. And in fact, I think it worked so well for them that they used it again on September the 11th, 2001. Ironically enough, when they created the House Assassinations Record Review Board in the wake of the Oliver Stone movie, because everybody said free the files, and by the way, they're still not free. CIA and the Secret Service still have files pertaining to the Kennedy assassination that they dragged their feet on and are still not been made public. But in there, what they did find was a copy of the Operation Northwoods, which was devised by the Joint Chiefs of Staff back in 1962 following the ill-fated Bay of Pigs invasion. And this plan, are you ready for this? Set off bombs in American cities, kill selected assassination targets in America, hijack planes and hijack ships, and then blame it all on Castro so that they could mount another invasion of Cuba with the support of the American people. Now, this incredible plan was actually approved by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It was only Kennedy who said, we don't play that game. and he stopped it. In fact, ordered them to destroy all the copies of Northwoods. But ironically enough, at least one copy survived in a government file somewhere, and who finds it but the Assassination Records Review Board in the early 90s, created to find documents from the Kennedy time period. And one of the schemes of Northwoods was to take an aircraft that was the same kind as a commercial airliner and paint it up to look like a airliner, and then take a regularly scheduled flight, land that, and deplane the passengers, and then take off again in this phony plane that was painted up and had the same tail numbers, and it was flown remotely, and they could do this in 1962. Fly it by remote control out over the Caribbean, and then remotely trigger a broadcasting signal that says, help, help, Mayday, we're under attack by Cuban jets, and then by remote control trigger a bomb and blow the thing up, and it sinks into the Caribbean, and we blame it on Castro.
Wow.
And I think something very similar happened on the morning of 9/11.
You have another book about that, don't you?
Yep, The Terror Conspiracy Revisited.
All right. So what you need to do, folks, is go to Amazon.com, put in Jim Marrs, Marrs, and get your little credit card out, and with your nimble fingers, select some books and put your number in and purchase them. A couple of people in the chat room, Jim, are talking about, and I think I saw something about this a couple of weeks ago on one of these specials, E. Howard Hunt, A Deathbed Confession.
Mm-hmm.
What do you have to say about that?
Well, I've met with his son, St. John Hunt, and saw all of the material that he has, and it certainly makes a lot of sense. He said his father, well, of course, E. Howard Hunt was right at the heart of all of this stuff. Without going into all the nuts and bolts, let me just point out that it was E. Howard Hunt who blackmailed Richard Nixon. All right, on the Watergate tapes, we learned that E. Howard Hunt was asking Nixon for $2 million, or he would break open the whole Bay of Pigs thing. And Nixon on the White House tape says, well, that would be bad for us. Oh, and bad for the country. And since he had installed the listening devices, I guess he suddenly realized he was probably being taped. And there was other discussions saying, yes, we can't go into that whole Bay of Pigs thing. And then, of course, he agreed. He said, pay him the money. And they got the $2 million. They paid it to Hunt's wife, Dorothy. But then she took a plane flight, and the whole plane crashed. Mm-hmm. And FBI agents showed up even before the paramedics. And, a bunch of stuff turned up missing. But so what was the big deal about the Bay of Pigs? What were they talking about, the whole Bay of Pigs thing? And because the Bay of Pigs, of course, was already over with, and the invaders had been stopped and captured, and it was a disaster. And even though Kennedy was presented with a fait accompli, he didn't even know there was going to be an invasion of Cuba until after he got elected president, and it was already a foregone conclusion, And yet he came on television. I can remember him saying that he was like the captain of the ship, and it was his responsibility, and he would take the responsibility. Unlike our leaders today, who are always saying the opposition is the fault. They did it, never taking responsibility for themselves. And so, what's the whole thing about the Bay of Pigs? Well, I believe it was Haldeman, H.R. Haldeman, the aide to Richard Nixon, wrote a book, and in there he said he finally figured out that all these times that Nixon was talking about the whole Bay of Pigs thing, he was actually talking about the Kennedy assassination. So see, there was you have to understand, Kennedy, it's generally thought that he was just part of the liberal Eastern moneyed establishment, and in a certain way, I guess he was, but not really. His dad, Joe Kennedy, was the son of a poor Irish immigrant. and they had been discriminated against like any other of the minorities back in the 1800s and early 1900s. And that was one reason Joe Kennedy wanted his sons to be powerful and maybe even get to be president of the United States, to simply prove to everyone that they were as good as anyone else, and maybe he could get a membership in the Boston Country Club or something. And so he really was quite different from every other president we've ever had. At 45, he was the youngest president in U.S. history, and he was also the first president born in the 20th century. He was one of the most highly educated of the presidents, and plus his family had lots of money. Joe was pretty rich, and so he wasn't scrambling around trying to make money like some of the other presidents. And so he had an intellectual and worldview that was over and above a lot of the other grubby politicians. And even though I was not a big fan of Kennedy's at the time, I have to grudgingly say that he was taking steps that at least he truly believed was in the best interest of the public of this country, supporting integration and withholding ground combat troops from Vietnam. I am convinced now, based on his National Security Action Memorandum, where he had agreed that we could pull out troops by 1965. And in fact, on October the 11th, 1963, in this memo, he said, make no formal announcement, but begin the withdrawal of 1,000 military advisors. And then on Monday, 24th of
November.
Yeah, November.
When Johnson took office.
25th. Monday would have been the 25th of November when Johnson is back and he's in office. He issues National Security Action Memorandum 273, which buried in there says, do not drop military or financial assistance to military to South Vietnam that would drop it below the levels of the Diem government. Well, the Diem brothers were assassinated around the 1st of October, 63, so that effectively stopped Kennedy's pullout orders, okay? Johnson's document goes on to talk about the plausibility of denial. Can we plausibly deny we're doing all this? Drawing up war plans against Laos, prosecuting the war, moving on to North Vietnam, et cetera, et cetera. So in other words, that is what set us on the course to the full-blown Vietnam War. Now, Laurel, here's the clinker. I managed to get a copy of the draft of Johnson's National Security Action Memorandum 273 from the Johnson Library in Austin, Texas. And guess when this thing was being written? On November the 21st, 1963. So the day before Kennedy was assassinated, they were completely changing his plans for Vietnam. Obviously, they knew he was not going to be around to countermand these orders.
Right. Do you know if anyone ever talked to the limousine drivers after all of this? I mean, surely someone interviewed them.
Yes, well, Greer, the driver of Kennedy's limousine, testified to the Warren Commission, and he said that he didn't even know the assassination happened, that he never looked back, and said the first thing he knew was when Roy Kellerman, who's sitting next to him in the passenger seat, said, "We're hit, get us out of here." Okay, and he said then he hit the accelerator, as was the standard procedure for Secret Service security, and he pulled on out of Dealey Plaza. Now the problem there is that the photographs and films show quite a different version.
Right.
They show that after the first shots, the brake lights come on the car, and the presidential limousine came to almost a complete stop. And in fact, that Secret Service backup car almost bumped up on the rear bumper, and that's when Secret Service agent Clint Hill jumped off and raced up and jumped on the back of Kennedy's limousine. And it also, in the Zapruder film, you can plainly see that the driver turns his head to the right and Greer looks back over his right shoulder directly at Kennedy until after the fatal headshot, and then his head looks forward, and then the brake lights come off the car and it begins to accelerate out of the plaza.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of question. Of course, what we also know is that the Secret Service detail the night before had gone, they were in Fort Worth, and while Kennedy was at the Texas Hotel, they left some Fort Worth firemen to guard him, and all the Secret Service detachment went off to the press club, started drinking, and then about midnight, when it was too late to be serving drinks, thanks to the Liquor Control Board, they moved the little party up to the Pat Kirkwood's cellar, where they were drinking mixed drinks until about 5 in the morning of the assassination.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Listen, Jim, we're coming up on a break here. I want to remind everybody you're listening to Jim Marrs talk about his, it's been hard to get a word in edgewise here, and it's too bad you weren't with us over the break, but I'll try and bring up some of the topics so you can hear them. Let me give you the radio call-in line. It's 888-919-2355. Jim, we were talking several things I want to bring up here. First of all, we were talking about Kennedy really didn't want us going into Vietnam. He was planning on bringing out the advisors and not sending boots on the ground, as they like to call them now. Somebody got rich off that war, though, didn't they? Isn't that one of the main reasons there was such a push to go into it?
Absolutely. In fact, when you stop and look at it, especially in Texas, we did quite well during the Vietnam War. We had, right up here in Dallas-Fort Worth area, we had General Dynamics, and we had Fort Walters over at Mineral Wells, where they were training the helicopter pilots, and the helicopters being made at Bell Helicopter, which is between Dallas and Fort Worth. And Ling Timco Vault was here, Texas Instruments, not to mention Brown and Root. And the Brown brothers had put Lyndon Johnson into office back in the 40s to save a electrical dam project down in South Texas, and he saved that for him, and then they got him the contract to build a Navy base at Corpus Christi, and of course Brown and Root was major contractors in Vietnam, built the highways and the runways, and practically built the whole port of Camaran Bay. And so, everybody in Texas did pretty well, so that's why there were a lot of people who had nothing to do with the assassination, but they weren't too inclined to try to look under the rocks and find out what was actually going on. But I'll tell you, I think the main reason that so many people went along with it, well, let me just put it this way. The polls show, and I think anybody who travels around much, and if you actually get out of your own little clique and circles, you find that about half the country right now loathes President Obama, okay? Mm-hmm. And I think it's growing now that everybody's figured out that his Obamacare is not anything like what it was cracked up to be. But anyway, and so I think, and some people are virulently anti-Obama. And that, so if tomorrow, if it was suddenly announced that Obama had been assassinated, almost half the country is going to go, well, good. Maybe that's good for the country. Well, that's today in a more knowledgeable and a more open type society. In the calmer, quieter, yet more provincial days of 1963, you could multiply those feelings by a factor of 10. And there were those who just detested Kennedy and truly believed that he was a threat and a danger to the country. And unfortunately, these people who felt that way were not your run-of-the-mill citizens or the man on the street. They were the captains of industry and the officers of the Pentagon and the intelligence chiefs, and these were all working hand in glove with the mafia. In fact, they've kept the researchers off balance for years by trying to say, well, okay, so who was behind the assassination? And once you disregard the idea of a foreign conspiracy, the Russians or Castro or whatever, which has never been proven. In
Hmm.
fact, there's a very obvious lack of any hard evidence pointing to the involvement. And besides that, you have to ask yourself: could Castro or could Khrushchev have blocked a federal investigation? Could they have put phony documents in the FBI files? Could they have altered evidence while it was in the hands of the federal authorities? And the answer is no.
No.
So you're back now to a domestic plot. So the question now becomes, was it the CIA? Was it the Mafia? Was it the anti-Castro Cubans? Was it the military? Was it the FBI? And the answer is yes.
Yes. Yes.
All of the above. And
Yes.
where do you find all of those groups and organizations intertwined? In Operation Mongoose, which was the secret war against Fidel Castro, headquartered out of the Jim Wave station on the University of Miami. And they had offices and operatives ranging around the Caribbean. Of course, Miami was the hotbed, but also Atlanta and
Hmm.
also New Orleans
New
and
Orleans.
also Dallas, Texas.
Hmm.
And so there, under Operation Mongoose, you had people being trained to go against Castro. That included anti-Castro Cubans, U.S. military people, CIA people, FBI people, and so and they were working hand in glove with the Mafia to provide hitmen. So I think what happened here was they simply decided that before they could do anything about the problem in Cuba, they had to do something about the problem in Washington. So they
Hmm.
simply sent some of their hit teams to Dallas.
Yeah.
And then they were able to cover the whole thing up because they controlled the investigation from the very top.
And there were actually two other planned assassination attempts in November of that year on him, one in Tampa and one in
Hmm.
Chicago. And one of them, he avoided the motorcade because he decided he was pretty obsessed already, wasn't he, with the fact that he was probably going to be shot and killed? Wasn't he making comments like,
Yeah,
all it takes
I
is
wouldn't say he
somebody
was
with a rifle?
I wouldn't say he was obsessed, but yeah, he was certainly aware of that possibility. And you're right, because he had told close friends, he said, "Oh, if they want to get me, they can get me. Just put a guy on a rifle with a rifle on a high building." And yeah, and the assassination attempt in Chicago, to me, is especially interesting because that involved the first black Secret Service agent, Abraham Bolden. And I have interviewed and spoken with Bolden, and he had a rough time because they retaliated against him for blowing the whistle on this Chicago plot and saying they had to change stuff up, and it didn't happen. But the thing that's the most interesting to me is that Bolden said that the Chicago plot was basically broken up because an FBI informant had leaked the word about what was going to happen, and it got out, and so they were forced to take steps to prevent it. And he said he never learned the true identity of this informant, but he did understand that his name was Lee. And
Oh.
and this fits right in with what I have determined in that Lee Harvey Oswald was working as a low-level intelligence operative for the United States government, just as his mother always claimed.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think originally he was picked up by the Office of Naval Intelligence and then passed along to the CIA, and then after he came back from Russia and was in Texas, I think he was picked up by the FBI and was being run as an informant. In fact, Wagner Carr, the Attorney General of Texas, went to the Warren Commission and said that they had information that Oswald was an FBI informant and that his code name was T-179. He was getting paid $200 a month. Okay, so Lee was on the inside. He learns of assassination plot in Chicago and gets back to somebody who's not in on it, and he breaks that one up. And then I happen to know, I can't prove this, so I didn't put this in the book, but I know for a fact that a few weeks before the assassination in Dallas, the Dallas police received a letter from an Alex J. Heidel warning
Hmm.
that Kennedy was going to be assassinated in Dallas and that they should take extra precautions. This, of course, at the time, they didn't know who A.J. Heidel was,
Mm-hmm.
and they had no idea if this was just a nut or if it was real. So it just got filed away. But on the Monday following the Friday assassination, the FBI went into Dallas Police Headquarters and went through everything. They went through the lockers and filing cabinets. They went through everything and snatching up anything that they thought might have something to do with the assassination. And that was to even include the saddlebags on the motorcycle officers' motorcycles. And needless to say, this letter from Alex J. Hidell, which was Oswald's alias, went missing, and of course has never been seen again.
And
But I
that
had
was
several officers tell me about it.
isn't that the name that he used to have the rifle delivered to him by U.S. Post?
Yes. And in fact, here's a very telling thing. See, here's the thing. We're all told that circumstantial evidence is not very good, that we want the hard evidence. We want the smoking gun. We want the fingerprints. And yet, actually, if you'll think about it, the circumstantial evidence may be the best evidence because the circumstances are the circumstances. You can't change the circumstances. Yeah. Unlike the smoking gun or the fingerprints, which can be planted, okay, and fabricated and falsified. And what am I talking about? Well, when Oswald was arrested, about 1:50, about a quarter till 2, after the assassination, which took place at 12:30 p.m. on that Friday. And then they took him a while to get to Dallas Police Station, probably 20, maybe even 30 minutes. And so it would have been close to 2:30 by the time he got to Dallas Police Headquarters, and on him they found two different identifications. One says he's Alex James Hidell, the other says he's Lee Harvey Oswald. And they're saying, okay, who are you? And he's being uncooperative. He said, you're the cops, figure it out. And so 2 hours after the shooting, the Dallas police had just received their suspect, and they weren't even sure of who he was. And yet, at that exact time, according to documents that were released in 1977, J. Edgar Hoover, head of the FBI, calls Bobby Kennedy and says, we have our man in Dallas. It's Lee Harvey Oswald. He's an ex-Marine, a communist. He's defected to Russia. He is a mean-spirited individual in the category of a nut. So he's already given out with this lone nut scenario and has a full rundown on Lee Harvey Oswald when the authorities at the scene weren't even sure who they had in custody.
And
that ought to tell you something.
Let me add to that, Jim, that at almost exactly the same time, right around 2 o'clock, LBJ is getting sworn in on board Air Force One with Kennedy's body there because they took Kennedy. They insisted on taking him out of the middle of the autopsy and wouldn't let him finish it and put him on the airplane to take him back up north.
That's right.
So they could hide the evidence.
And yes, and that was totally against the law, by the way.
Right.
Because at that time there was no law, a federal law, regarding assassination of the President of the United States. So at that time, legally, this was a Texas homicide. And under the law, there had to be an inquest by a coroner before you could do anything with the body. And yet they pulled guns and were cursing and pushing and shoving, and they pushed the Texas authorities out of the way, and they hauled Kennedy's body up to Bethesda Naval Hospital for the autopsy, and they said this was on orders of his successor, Lyndon Johnson. So in other words, one of the first actions that Lyndon Johnson took upon becoming President of the United States was to violate the laws of his own state.
It's just stunning. Say something about the Jack Ruby connection. That's another whole fascinating story, and how he's connected with the mob in New Orleans, and he also knew and had been seen with Oswald the months preceding the assassination, right?
That's true. In fact, at the time, some of them now might be tough. Some of them probably, a lot of them probably dead by now. But at the time, knowing what I know now, I could have produced more than 15 witnesses who could place Oswald and Ruby together before the assassination. They were mixed up in this whole thing together. That's another thing. Let me point out. I'm trying to make the point that Oswald was not just some innocent patsy, just, some guy off the street that they picked up. No, he was involved in this whole thing, but I think as a low-level intelligence agent, or an FBI informant. Okay, and but I don't think he did the shooting. He was exactly what he said. He was the patsy. And Jack Ruby played a role in that. For one thing, there is a note that surfaced that shows that in 1947 they were having hearings of the Un-American Activities Committee, and they were looking into organized crime. And the head of the committee got a note that said that one Jacob Rubenstein, which was Jack Ruby's real name, of Chicago, and that's where he was from, said they're thinking about calling him to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee, and we're asking that you not do that because he is performing information functions for Congressman Richard Nixon. So you got Jack Ruby and Richard Nixon tied together as far back as 1947.
Wow. Wow.
And the key to Ruby's shooting Oswald, obviously, he got the word. He was the guy on the scene. He was in and out. All the cops knew him. He knew all the cops. Everybody came to his carousel club and hung out, and he gave them free drinks and on like that, just like Pat Kirkwood did over in Fort Worth. And he was kind of the go-between between the police and the mobsters, okay? And he tried to kind of play both sides. And so he was obvious choice to get into the Dallas Police Department and kill Oswald and silence him. But, of course, they've argued against that pretty successfully over the years by saying, well, a few minutes, they were supposed to transfer Oswald at 10 o'clock on that Sunday morning, and it was not until about 11:20, almost an hour and a half later, before they actually transferred him. And just about 5 or 10 minutes before they moved Oswald, Ruby was next door at the Western Union office sending a telegram to one of his dancers. And, that was clocked in, so they know he was there at that point. And so that's why they came up with this idea that somehow he just strolled down the ramp into the Dallas police station and just happened to be there when they transferred Oswald, and just happened to, in a state of grief and not wanting to have Mrs. Kennedy have to come back to testify at a trial, he just pulled out his little .38 and he shot Oswald,
right.
as a great act of vengeance and stuff. And it's all hogwash, because the reality is that even some people in the Dallas Police Department realize this today, that he came down the back alley and was let into the basement of the Dallas Police Station by some Dallas police officer, okay? Now, the key to it is not that Ruby knew when they were going to transfer Oswald. In fact, I suspect he was dragging his feet. He knew everybody, they had made public announcement that they were going to move Oswald at 10 o'clock. So, he should have been in there at 10 o'clock, but he wasn't, dragged his feet for almost an hour and a half because he didn't really want to do that. But you don't say no to the mafia, They tell you to do something, you just do it. And so the key to the shooting of Oswald is not that Ruby knew when they were going to transfer Oswald, but you just reverse it. They didn't move Oswald until Ruby was in position to shoot him.
Right. And like you were talking about circumstantial evidence. I mean, how the pieces fit together so tightly. I don't know how you can deny it. Did you say anything about the Secret Service washing down the car, the limo, after at LBJ's insistence before it could even be treated as a crime scene? Well,
remember I said that Johnson and Hoover were guilty as accessories after the fact, and there's one there. Johnson ordered the car cleaned up and shipped out and rebuilt and sent off, and they repainted it, and all before there was any kind of forensic or ballistic forensic check of the car. That's destruction of evidence. If you or I did that in connection with a capital murder case, we'd be thrown in jail.
Well, and I guess their excuse would be, well, I mean, we know he shot him, and it's just too bad somebody shot him before we could take him to justice. But there wasn't a crime scene because we knew what happened, right?
Right. Now that's the case on Ruby. They could say, well, we don't need any evidence. Everybody in the world saw him get shot on live
right
TV.
On TV.
Yeah, but this was the presidential limousine.
Right.
This was, just think about it. The president's riding in an open limousine. shots are fired. Nobody saw anybody shooting. Nobody saw somebody fire from the 6th floor. Nobody saw anything. There were shots. Kennedy's hit. You would think that that limousine would become prime evidence, because you could then forensically study the limousine and find out how many shots were fired and which direction they came from, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
So by ordering the car destroyed and rebuilt, that was nothing but blatant destruction of evidence.
Yep.
Same thing with Governor Connolly's clothes that was taken into possession by Congressman Henry Gonzalez of Texas. And then Cliff Carter, Johnson's aide, shows up and says, "Oh, I'm here to get Governor Connolly's clothing for the Warren Commission." And he said, "Well, okay." And they turned over Connolly's clothes, which could have shown you, the bullet holes in the clothes could tell you where the shots came from, and various, you might even pick up traces of the metal and things like that. In other words, forensic evidence. And yet, when Connolly's clothing is presented to the Warren Commission, it had been cleaned and pressed.
Oh, that's amazing.
It's destroyed the evidence.
Amazing.
And that's not even talking about the evidence in for example, in the FBI files, a document they released about 1968 was an FBI report stating that the paper, wrapping paper available in the school book depository matched paper that they said was shaped into the shape of a gun case that Oswald used to smuggle the rifle into the depository building. Well, that's pretty incriminating. But in 1980, the same looking document comes out from a whole batch of FBI files, same report, same agent, same file number, same date, and it says the paper did not match the wrapping paper in the school book depository. Well, now, wait a minute. You got two FBI reports, and they say they're diametrically opposite? What's going on here? Well, the FBI was queried about that, and the spokesman said, well, the document that said they don't match it, that's a phony document. Well, excuse me, how many phony documents are in the hands of the FBI?
Well,
and who could do that? Only the most powerful forces in the country.
Right.
You and I couldn't go up and slip a phony document into the FBI files.
No. And several of the people who testified the day of the shooting and days afterwards claimed that when they saw their final testimony in the Warren Commission paperwork, they said it had been altered. Some of them said that their testimonies weren't even in there.
That's right. That's exactly right. And in fact, if you want to get real blatant about it, the Newman family, who were probably the closest to Kennedy at the time of the fatal headshot, they were never even questioned by the Warren Commission. And why not? Because Bill Newman was on Dallas television within an hour or so of the shooting, and he said, well, the shots came from up behind us on that knoll. Okay?
Right.
So they're already on the record saying the shots came from the grassy knoll, so the Warren Commission, they just didn't even talk to them.
This is the
how's that
father.
For an investigation?
This is the father and the wife and the two little kids, and the
Right.
parents threw their bodies over the kids on the ground, right?
Right.
Yeah, very dramatic. Oh my!
And
it's
not like you couldn't find the Newmans. He went into the electrical contracting business, and they had Newman Electric over in Dallas. He's in the phone book. I called him up and talked to him many times. Okay, it's not like they were inaccessible or nobody could find them, and they just didn't want to hear from that. In fact, I'll tell you another person. Do you know who Evelyn Lincoln was?
Yes.
Kennedy's personal secretary.
Uh-huh.
And she was at his elbow day and night, and if anyone knew what was really going on, it would have been Evelyn Lincoln. Now, Laurel, let me ask you this. How many times do you remember seeing an interview with Evelyn Lincoln? You've never seen one, have you?
No.
You know why? Because I have a letter from her dated about 1996. I think she's passed away now. But in this letter, she states, I believe there was a conspiracy because there were those that wanted to get rid of him, and didn't know any other way. And she said the 5 conspirators are Lyndon Johnson, J. Edgar Hoover, the Mafia, the CIA, and the Cubans in Florida. So she
Yep.
pretty well had it nailed down.
Yep. Yep. And she knew all
And
the
that's why you never saw an interview with her, because she'd probably
right.
tell you the truth.
Well, and she probably knew that if she did, you'd never hear from her again.
That's right. That's
Couple of
right.
that's which brings us to a question in the chat room. I've got a couple of other questions too, but um, mysterious deaths. This entire thing, and now I'm thinking about the fella, I can't remember his name, who was up in the railroad dispatch tower.
Lee Bowers.
Yeah, he's only one of many, but say something about the mysterious death that happened to witnesses.
Well, I don't want to get trapped by calling them mysterious deaths, because I've been hammered by the debunkers saying, "Why are you talking about mysterious death? Nothing mysterious." Now, for one thing, if you go and check my book, you'll find I don't even refer to them as mysterious deaths. I simply call them convenient deaths, because
Okay.
they were certainly convenient for anyone who did not want the truth of the assassination to come out. And in fact, I had a complete listing of those in Crossfire, and I've pared some of that down to get other information in, but still, it's all there. I think one of the most telling things, well, there are 2 things. First off, within the first couple of years, there's like 25 people that could have been critical material witnesses who all died, and most of them unnatural deaths. Okay, shot, 1-car accidents, heart attacks, or whatever, and you never know. But the one that really got me was in 1977, when the House Select Committee on Assassinations was underway. They had subpoenaed 7, I believe it was 7 FBI officials who had all participated in the FBI's investigation of the Kennedy assassination, and they were all subpoenaed to come testify, and all of them died before they could testify.
Wow.
Including William Sullivan, the 3rd-ranking man in the FBI. Okay.
Wow.
Who was shot in his backyard by the son of a New Hampshire state policeman. And the local sheriff said, well, I knew both the policeman and his son, and I knew Sullivan, and so he recused himself from the investigation and turned it over to the animal control officer, who filled out a form, and then when it said victim, animal or human, checked human, and that was about the extent of that investigation.
Oh, my goodness. Did you say that you've got a list of all of these convenient...
yeah, there's a whole chapter on that in Crossfire.
Oh, my gosh. That's amazing.
And now, I didn't include everyone, because obviously after, say, 20, 30 years, then obviously you're going to have some attrition.
Oh, sure.
Through natural causes. But I think now the number stretches up into past 100 of people who knew things. And also what got me is once you start studying these convenient deaths, you find that they go into groupings, okay? Like I said, the first 20 or 25 occurred within a couple of years, and they were mostly people who knew Jack Ruby, or knew what was going on around the Dallas underworld, okay? And suddenly they're all gone. And then it kind of died off, and then around 68, you had the Garrison trial, and David Ferry, and his ex-roommate, Lottie Old Duvall, and several other people there connected in New Orleans, they turned up dead, okay? And so then it kind of went quiet again for a while, and then when the House Assassinations Committee came into being and started subpoenaing people, then you've got George de Mohrenschildt, the last known close friend of Oswald. He suddenly commits suicide. You've got Johnny Roselli found murdered and stuffed in a barrel in Key Biscayne. You got these 7 FBI guys, and all these important people. Oh, and I love Sam Giancana, the mafia boss of Chicago, was under federal protection, but one night they stepped out to get a sandwich, and just in that little time while they're gone, somebody comes in his house and kills him. And so, here all of a sudden, all these people are supposed to testify to the House committee, they're all dead and gone, and it just kind of goes on and on. It's really an amazing story, and again, this is evidence of a coup d'etat.
Yeah, that's very convenient. All of that you just described is extremely convenient. Um, Couple more questions, and I'm going to give out that telephone number one more time, 888-919-2355. It's your chance to talk to Jim Mars in person and ask him your question about the JFK assassination. Uh, Two last questions I have for you, Jim, unless something else comes in. What do you have to say about Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln versus JFK? Have you spent any time thinking about that over these years?
Oh yeah, and there's a big connection that I'm not sure everybody's familiar with. I think a lot of people have seen these incredible coincidences, or the parallels between the Kennedy assassination and the Lincoln assassination. For example, Lincoln had Kennedy had a secretary named Lincoln, and Lincoln had a secretary named Kennedy.
Oh my goodness.
And it just goes on, and it's almost enough to make you go, wait a minute, something's going on here. But I'll tell you the thing that strikes me, and I think this is one of the key three reasons that Kennedy was assassinated. And it wasn't just an assassination, it was a public execution. Mm-hmm. And it was carried out for the same reason that we publicly execute criminals, and that is to serve as a deterrent to anyone who would consider following in his footsteps and doing the things he was trying to do. Okay? And so the three things I think that got Kennedy killed was, we've already touched on one, which was the fact that he was not going to prosecute the Vietnam War as it came to actually be. Mm-hmm. I think, I'm not sure if he was talking about pulling out, but even if he hadn't pulled out, I'm pretty convinced he would have never have allowed the introduction of ground combat troops in Vietnam, and we would not have had the Vietnam War as we did. But of course, the military-industrial complex, as Eisenhower called it, they wanted that war.
Right.
The second thing has to do with the money in the bankers, which was a big deal starting in 2008, and the 1% and the New World Order, okay, and Wall Street, and the fact that we've been raped for billions of dollars in this country, trillions actually, and nobody's gone to jail except Bernie Madoff, and that's simply because he was ripping off the rip-off artist. Mm-hmm. And so what we found out is that in June of 1963, Kennedy ordered the issuance of $4.2 billion in United States notes. Now, this is money that is produced not through the interest-bearing Federal Reserve System, but through the Treasury Department, based on our silver reserves. Mm-hmm. And it's a silver-backed currency, and so it's really not worth any more than a Federal Reserve dollar, except we don't have to pay interest on it. And that's the national debt, is all this interest we have to pay to these international bankers. Yep. For all this money that we're creating based on our debt. And so he bypassed the Federal Reserve System and was going to print his own money. He became the second president in U.S. history to try that. And the first one was, interestingly enough, Abraham Lincoln, who stated that he thought the greatest creative power that government has is the power to print its own money. And so he printed up greenbacks to finance the war between the states. And Laurel, I'm here to tell you, I don't think it was just a coincidence that both of those presidents were shot in the head in public.
Yeah, yeah. What we know, I mean, that's such a hot topic right now in the circles that you and I both know, Jim, about the New World Order and the Rothschilds and the Bushes and all of those banking families throughout time, and there's way less than 1% of them in terms of the population of the earth, but they own just about everything.
Everything, absolutely. And that's another thing, too. I've named Lyndon Johnson and J. Edgar Hoover as guilty in the Kennedy assassination, not for ordering or orchestrating it, but for simply because they were accessories after the fact. They helped cover it up. And I'm here to tell you, I am not one of these who thinks that Lyndon Johnson, ordered the whole thing and concocted the whole thing. There are some books and some people out now claiming this. I don't particularly buy this, because was Johnson murderous enough to do that? Absolutely. Would he have joined in on an assassination plot? Yes. But was he powerful enough to pull something like that off by himself? And I maintain no. I don't think he could have done, nobody could have moved against the president unless Wall Street gave him the go-ahead.
Yeah. And plus, Johnson had a lot of his own enemies and was thought of more as almost a thug and not so much a powerful man, except out of a thuggish kind of a way.
Exactly. So if it was just him, equally powerful people would have figured out a way to implicate him or get him out of the way one way or another. The fact that they all got away with it and Johnson kept his peace shows me, or indicates to me, that there were powerful supporters behind him, and I'm thinking Wall Street. David Rockefeller, for example, had published at his own expense full-page ads in the New York Times blasting Kennedy's economic policies. They were all down on Kennedy because he and his Secretary of the Treasury were trying to cut back and the power of the Federal Reserve System, and you just don't mess with those international bankers.
No, you do not. Only at your own peril. Jim,
Yep.
who was in the movie? Can you tell us who Mr. X was supposed to be that was played by Donald Sutherland?
Yes. Okay. Actually, that was Colonel Fletcher Prouty, who I spoke with on several occasions. A great, I hold him in very high regard. But here's the problem. As you know, Oliver Stone caught so much flack anyway for that movie, and if he had portrayed the guy and named him as Colonel Prouty, the naysayers would have been, well, he's just making stuff up because Jim Garrison never met with Colonel Prouty at the time of the assassination or at the time of the prosecution in New Orleans of Clay Shaw. And that's correct, actually. It was much later that Garrison got in touch with Prouty and got this inside view. But now, at the time, he did go to Washington, and he met with a military intelligence operative named Richard Case Nagel. And Nagel sat him down and told him a lot of things. So Stone wanted to use a character who was an inside source, a deep throat, if you will, and he wanted to give out the information that Garrison ultimately learned from Colonel Prouty, but he couldn't use Prouty's name because they would say, well, that didn't happen at that time period, and so he's just making stuff up. So what he did was he made a composite character, and he called him Mr. X, but it was actually Richard Case Nagel and Colonel Fletcher Prouty.
And beautifully played by Donald Sutherland, I must say.
Exactly. And everything Sullivan says is basically what Prouty told Garrison, but in later years.
Uh-huh. Well, Jim, we don't have but about 5 minutes left, and so here's the climactic question.
Okay.
In just less than 2 weeks, it's going to be 50 years. I mean, a lot of water's gone under the bridge in 50 years. Why will the powers that be, whoever you want to say that is, why will no one acknowledge this and claim, yeah, we did this?
Okay. Again, I've been asked time and time again over the years, will we ever learn the truth about the Kennedy assassination? And again, they're not asking the right question, because we know the truth now. If you'll study the evidence, and you'll find that there was cover-up, obfuscation at the highest level of federal government, which this is what turns what was actually just a Texas homicide into a national coup d'etat. But so what they're actually asking is, will there ever be a day when they'll hold a news conference and some federal official will get up and go, okay, here's what really happened to President Kennedy? And I'm here to tell you, no, that ain't going to happen. And why not? Because there are too many families, too many companies, too many organizations, too many relatives, too many people who thought it was probably a good thing that Kennedy was taken out, and they're still around. and their sons, daughters, offspring, they're still around, and they simply don't want to go through the travail of saying, yes, okay, here's what really happened. But I think the key thing is this. If they ever officially admit that there was a coup d'etat in this country in 1963, that means every administration since the Johnson administration is an illegal, illegitimate administration. And you can just imagine what a heyday the lawyers would have by saying, well, this was a coup, this was an illegitimate government, and so all the laws that's been passed, all the regulations that's been passed, all of the government policies, the bombing and droning, killings, everything's gone on. It's all illegal. It would throw everything into chaos. And so they just can't ever admit that. They'll never admit it. So it's going to end up kind of like Pearl Harbor. Even as a young man, even back in the 40s and 50s, I heard that Roosevelt and a handful of others in Washington knew that Pearl Harbor was going to be attacked on that Sunday morning, but they didn't do anything about it. They allowed it to happen because it fit their political agenda, which was to get an aroused and united American people into World War II. Now, that's been a controversy all through the years, but by today, the serious researchers, it's no longer a controversy. That's what happened, okay? But a lot of people still don't realize that because they don't just come out and tell you that in the news. It's old news now, so nobody knows about it except those who study the history. And this is what's going to happen here. Another 50 years, everybody's going to talk about the coup of 1963, and they're just go on like, well, yeah, I was taught that in school. I know about that. It's only the people like you and I who lived through it and who were told one thing and then have struggled for 50 years to try to get our heads around the idea that it was something else.
Gosh. Well, folks, this is your last chance. If you want to call one more time, we're offering 888-919-2355. Jim, I know you've got a website, jimmars.com, and I've signed on there, and I am very proud to say I'm a Martian.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. I need to do more on that, but as soon as I figure out some really inside dirt, I'll put it in the Martian thing.
Hey, just out of curiosity, just give me an estimate. How many pages are your references, your list of references for this book?
Oh, well, just a minute, I can tell you.
It's got to be astounding.
I know that the index runs to 30 pages.
Oh, my
goodness. So
goodness.
that's a lot, okay? And let me see here. The notes run from, I don't know, how's your math? Page 557 to 525. Oh, no, that's not right. To 579. So 57, 6, 7, 7, 7. Yeah, about 30 pages of notes.
Yeah, right. Wow. In small print, probably.
Yeah.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Well, I know that you are one of the highly attracted speakers at the Epic Voyagers meetings there in Grapevine monthly, and I know that there's at least a few of your presentations on YouTube, right?
Oh, yeah, and I think there's going to be more, and also I'm putting the finishing touches on a video that will be available.
Wonderful, and where will we find that when it comes out?
It will be on my video channel, which I think is Jim Mars, I think. I don't know. I haven't totally gotten into that yet.
Okay. But in other words, if we check with your website, jimmars.com, we'd be able to find that.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm definitely going to inform everybody. Oh, and I'll tell you what, if you want to see some of this evidence for yourself, there's going to be the EPIC meeting on December the 15th at the Grapevine Convention Center. Okay? And I forget what time, about 1 o'clock, I think, in the afternoon on this Sunday afternoon, December the 15th, and I'll be presenting my program to the EPIC group there.
Oh,
so
fantastic.
Don't miss that. Then you don't have to worry about it. You want to believe me, you can see the evidence for yourself.
Folks, anybody that's anywhere near North Texas, I know Ken Sherry, the president of EPIC, had been talking about trying to get you in. I'm glad to hear that he got you scheduled on that. So that's 12:15, which is a Sunday, in Grapevine. Go to Epic Voyagers, EPICVOYAGERS JFK.com, and you've got the map and the instructions and everything there that you can find the meeting place. It usually happens at 2 in the afternoon. Uh, and as I said, check out Jim's presentations through Epic there on the YouTube channel. Just put in Jim Mars and he'll pop up. Um, we've got some pretty good shows coming up here at Epic Voyages scheduled for you. Kevin Cook next week will be talking to Heidi Hollis. Dr. Rita Louise the week after that. I'm coming back on December the 2nd, and I'll be talking to Scotty Roberts and Dr. John Ward about their new book, The Exodus Reality. And the week after that, I'll be back talking to Scott Walter, whose second season of America Unearthed is getting ready to start on TV. Dr. Aaron Judkin, will be back on the 16th, the 23rd, and January the 6th talking about ancient paganism, a Christmas special about the Star of Bethlehem, and Mike McDaniel's new book about judging angels. So we've got a whole lot of really good shows lined up for you here on Monday nights on InceptionRadioNetwork.com. Jim, you were wonderful. Absolutely a delight to talk to.
Well,
Here's
thank
a
you,
quick
Laurel,
question.
and don't trust me. Just go study this for yourself. You'll find out everything I told you is true. Of course, obviously, you've done your homework, too.
Someone here is so excited. Will you sign books if we buy them through Jim's website?
Well, I'm not really set up to do that, but if they can make it to the Epic meeting, I'll be glad to sign them a book.
Yep, I knew that. So if you're anywhere near North Texas, or if you want to get in touch with Ken Cherry through the epicvoyagers.com website, we'll get you one signed for sure.
There you go.